Okay.
Got it. Okay, thanks, David. Yeah, so Yi's going to take over from there, and he's going to present a couple of things. He did a test on point cloud in twinmotion, and there had some interesting and successful results there. So it's another way that we can use those point cloud files. He's also been using the ray tracing features in twinmotion. He's going to present sort of the limits on how we can use those and what we would use that for. He got some really cool results from twinmotion using those features. And then we're going to wrap it up with another twinmotion presentation from Matt, who's going to talk about asset management and Quixel and maybe a few other quick tips on twinmotion. So with that, we'll go ahead and hand it over to Alexa. The stage is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see this? All right. So I'm Alexa, and I'm going to give you guys an overview about the 3D printer, like Patrick mentioned. We have and how we've used it over the past couple of years at the office. It's located right now down in the basement, so you might not have seen it, but this is what we have at the office. We have the Ultimaker S5, which is a pretty nice printer with a lot of different features to it. I won't dive into all of the features now, but I wanted to point out to you all specifically the build volume, which is pretty large. So it's around 13 inches by 9.5 by 12 inches, which means that theoretically you could print a pretty decent sized print, which is nice. And then also the different colors of filament we have available. So the filament is what the printer uses to print. And we have black, white, and gray at the office currently. So just keep that in mind too. But it's a really great printer, and we're very lucky to have it in the office to our disposal. And so yeah, I just wanted to jump in to a couple examples of how we've used this printer in the past year specifically. So for KR, the KR team reached out to us about printing 2 thumb turns at 1:1 scale. And one of them was shared with Jada for them to test fit into their flush pull. So it was sent directly to the manufacturer. And by doing this, the KR team was able to validate that the size for the thumb turn was correct. And then they were eventually able to turn that over to Sun Valley Bronze to cast the thumb turns into the bronze material. So very useful process, not just in terms of in thinking about it at that 1:1 scale specifically. And then this is for McKenna. We shared both of these also on Slack, so you guys might have seen these over the years, but the McKenna team came up to us looking at printing 2 different prototypes for a overflow outlet cover. So on the left here, you can see what was installed, and they wanted to install or figure out a design for a custom recessed outlet. And so Amadeo had shared this sketch that he did looking at the design for a custom cover. And these 2 center images are the 2 prototypes we printed on our printer, again at 1:1 scale. And on the right, you can see the final outlet that was the cover that was installed, which is pretty cool to see the process of, what was there and then how the team was able to develop and improve on to get what they wanted in the end. And then last example, as some of you guys might know, I'm on the Yellowstone Club team along with Brooks, Clark, and DeJaneiro, and we've been heavily using the 3D printer for this project, specifically looking at the cabinet pulls. We, from the start, were interested in doing a custom cabinet pull, and it's been an amazing tool along the way to figure out lots of things. For example, the interior dimensions of the pull and making sure your fingers fit and adjusting that as needed. And we actually shared these 3D prints with the general contractor, Yellowstone Traditions, and they're going to be making the casework in the end, but they're the cabinet shop, but they were able to CNC out basically the negative space of the cabinet, and we were able to work with them to figure out how these poles are going to get installed and any issues along the way. We actually figured out we needed to have a little lip. You can see it here in this right image, to basically cover any tolerances when they CNC out from that panel. But it was just a really good tool to go back and forth with them to produce this. And now NANS is actually going to be working to custom extrude these poles for us. So just that, having NANS do the samples for us would have been way more expensive than it was for us to figure out all the little issues along the way with a 3D printer. So yeah, it's been a great tool for us and a lot of other projects. And yeah, this is a very quick intro to the 3D printer and how we've been using it. And I urge you all to think about how you can utilize the printer for your projects at any part of the design process. And yeah, you can reach out to me or Conrad or DeJaneiro if you have any questions, or if you want to contact us about using this for your projects. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh,
yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I was wondering if we are interested in any SLA printers rather than this kind of more traditional FDM printers, which is like larger. I mean, the tolerance is bigger. Because this kind of FDM printer usually has a layer height of 0.1 to 0.5 millimeters, and SLA usually has like 10 times smaller than that, which is 0.01 to 0.05. Because I see we are doing some many this kind of hardware prints, so might have to have like more precise printer, and those are really cheap. And I have one at home, which is only like $400.
Oh, we can definitely look into that. I know that the printer, we do have, I forget the exact height of layers, but I think it gets pretty thin.
Yeah.
The level of quality is pretty high on it.
Yeah, but if you flip to the custom doorknob, the black ones, it's not, because the layer height is very high, so the fillet edge on the edge is not showing that well.
Yeah, how much on those prints, Alexa, how much like sort of post-print cleanup do you have to do in terms of like removing support tags and sanding or buffing, or is it just sort of like proof of concept, get the shape down?
Well, so that's a good question, because the printer we have does have various levels of quality. So if it's something for more internal use, you can print it at a higher layer thickness. So it takes a lot less time and is also cheaper to print. But yeah, it doesn't look as clean. And then you can do the opposite, where you can have a really, really thin extrusion layer height, and that takes a long time, but then it looks very clean. And I would say that the cleanup is pretty minimal. The supports are really easy to break off, and we also do have a water soluble support. So you could, in that case, print it and then dunk it in water, and then the supports just come off on their own. But I haven't had to do much sanding with this 3D printer, but I know in like school myself, I had a 3D printer, and a lot of friends had 3D printers, and they would, sand it and spray paint it. So there's a lot of layer of how you can work with the prints.
So the one we have has double nozzles.
Yes.
Oh, and Alexa, I was wondering, can you just give like a really quick overview of the workflow, like is it like Archicad to Rhino to Kira, or?
So I guess if you were to model it 1-to-1 scale, for example, that custom hardware, the pole we were doing at Yellowstone, we modeled it 1-to-1, and then you can actually, you make it a morph in Archicad, and you'd save it as a specific file type, which is called an STL. And then that's what you bring directly into the 3D printing software. So like there's this program where you plug it in. You can also do it in Rhino too. And you do the same process where you have to like Boolean union everything though. So it's one object, but you save it as that specific file type. And then from there, that's what you would have to bring. That you would bring that Archicad file to us at the 3D printing team, and then we could export it out as an STL and bring it into the software for you.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, you can also do like different scales, and if you wanted to do like a little mini version of your building, there's infinite ways that you could look at how to use this printer.
Yeah, I remember, Alexa, previously you'd help me print a like a full topo model of the whole site, you know, at a very tiny scale. It's sitting on my desk in the office and people see it. And just on that, I think for the right project team and the right opportunity, if the stars align, if it makes sense to print out a site model with different building massing formats that plug in, you know, I feel like we can kind of go back to the history of Sandrine's beautiful models all on the shelves for the right project where it makes sense. So just something to keep in mind, that it's not just for hardware testing, but it's also a design tool.
And I will say too that we have a cost worksheet. So pretty quickly we can kind of guess how much it'll cost the client to do a print if you provide us with that Archicad file or STL. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And it's not crazy expensive either.
All right, we can circle around to more questions at the end, but so we've got a couple of more presentations to go, so we'll get through those right now. Thank you, Alexa. There will be a write-up. I think we're going to put it on the DubHub coming soon on the 3D printing itself. Right now, there's a write-up on the next topic, which is point cloud integration into Archicad. This is on the BIM manual. I did share this link on the BIM channel on Slack. But this is what we're going to look at today for my part of the presentation. So just a quick overview, the file compatibility limitations. So files really can't be much more than about 4 gigabytes. And really anything more than a gigabyte is going to really tank an Archicad file. So keep in mind that file, just like with SketchUp integration and things like that, the file size is one aspect to it, but also file complexity. Since it's a point cloud, there are no polygons, they're actually just points. And Archicad seems to have a pretty high tolerance for points, but it's really easy to reach that number. 280 million points seems like a lot until you consider that those points, depending on the resolution of the scan, could potentially be like a 64th of an inch apart. And we'll take a look at an actual point cloud integrated into Archicad in more detail to show what that means. So for the Martis Camp example that we looked at the 5x5 last week, those points are approximately 5/32 of an inch apart when you zoom in on them, which is a good enough resolution for us to utilize that file for its purposes, which was to sort of validate what's already been built, check the plumbness of the concrete work that had been put in place. File formats that work with Archicad, there are actually, I was finding about 6 to 8 different file formats. The 2 primary file types for point cloud are, it's called ASC2 or ASCII, and then binary files. But the subfile formats for that are either E57 or XYZ. So if you're having a point cloud scan done, getting one from a consultant or doing it yourself, that's the export option that we need. We need to have either an E57 or an XYZ file. Archicad Graphisoft actually recommends XYZ over E57 because it's sort of more flexible. I was seeing workflows using Python, and then there's also an application called Cloud Compare. Those can be used to kind of downsample a point cloud. I haven't worked through that workflow completely. I've tested it out, but not sure that it's going to be part of our toolkit just yet. But it's important to know that those point clouds are not necessarily set in stone. It's not like it's, if it doesn't work, there's ways to get around it. For Martis Camp, we just asked the contractor to break it up into separate files for us. So another thing about the XYZ file that's nice is it's basically a text file. So each line of text represents a single pixel. Because of that, they can basically, Graphisoft actually posted this on their forum, that XYZ files, you can estimate the number of points without having to have extra software simply by the file size. There's every megabyte of file size roughly correlates to 30,000 points. So you can have a rough idea of how many points are in the file without having to even try it out. So, you know, if you got an 8 GB XYZ file, you know that it's not going to work with Archicad even before you try it out. Some common uses or ways that we might be able to use point cloud. The primary use is really as-built verification to check what's on the site, what's in the building, what's been built. If it's a remodel project, we could do point cloud to verify our as-built model. Site and context verification. So if we have a terrain model, obviously there are margins of errors with any survey, site survey. You know, we've all seen like contours that just don't seem to match what's on the site. So if we had a point cloud scan of that site and that terrain, it would be a great way to verify our site mesh. Like I said before in the sort of intro to all of this, they can be integrated straight into twinmotion. So if there's some site feature or site context, rather than modeling that out, we can import it into twinmotion. Because it's a point cloud, there's no surface, there's no solid modeling. They can look somewhat transparent depending on the density of those points. They can be used for construction administration. That's really sort of what was used for Martis Camp, was to verify the concrete work. I've seen examples of it being used to verify beam and joist locations to coordinate ductwork and mechanical MEP as well. The process for importing is written down in here with screenshots, and then there's some tips. And we're going to go through that sort of on the fly right now. So rather than reading through this any further, I just want to take a look at importing a point cloud. So I have a blank file here. And that's one of the tips, is to, rather than importing these huge point cloud files, potentially 2, 3, 4 gigabyte files, rather than importing them into your working file and really crippling that file performance, create either a duplicate of your working file or even just sandbox it in a blank file. And that's what I have here. So to import a point cloud, you just go to File, Interoperability, and Import Point Cloud. It's really that simple. As long as you have the E57 or the XYZ file extension, it should work. So here I have 4 of the broken out point cloud files that we got from Dow. You know, there's the guest house foundation. I didn't actually bring in the main house foundation. We have that in a separate file that I'll show you when we get done here. There's the grading file, the landscape file that shows all of the trees. The trees were really a ton of the points contributing to the full file that they sent us originally. The full file, I want to say, was like, I forget what it was. It was hundreds of millions of points over our limit. So they just started breaking it out into separate pieces. I'm going to go ahead and import just this one right here. You can see if I go to options, that's really kind of what we have. E57 or XYZ are the file formats. So when you say open, this is where it's going to convert this point cloud into an Archicad Gdl-Based object. You can rename it right here. So I can say that this is the guest house. I don't have to use the full file name, which is actually a good practice. It allows you to sort of filter out special characters. Obviously, a lot of times file names are a whole freaking storybook of descriptions. So we can reduce that down to this is guest house or guest house point cloud or whatever. Be concise with naming conventions. And then you can either create that file, which just puts it in the embedded library, or you can say create in place, which I'm going to do right here, and it processes for a few seconds. When I tested this out, it really only took maybe 10, 15 seconds. So now that I'm doing it on the fly, it's probably going to take 3 minutes. That's the way it goes. If it doesn't work, we'll just switch over to the already placed model and use that as an example. Well, we'll let that run, and I'll go ahead and switch over to the already placed. So this is on the BIM server. This is Martis Camp point cloud coordination. How did it go? There we go. All right, so this was the next step that I wanted to demonstrate was, so when you place it, it asks whether you want to place by point cloud origin or specify a point when you place it. We're just going to use the default point cloud origin and set the home story to the first floor. Once you place it, it's already converted that, so hopefully it's not processing another 3 minutes here. switch back over to here. So we could see what like this piece right here, for example, this is a point cloud that we were looking at for verifying the foundation, the concrete work here. And you can actually zoom in and get an idea of how close it is to the Archicad model. So we could see the Archicad foundation is that drafted fill, and sort of all that rough pixelated edge, that's the point cloud scan. So it gets you pretty close to understanding sort of where that edge of the point cloud is. But you can see sort of that thickness right there. These points don't have a thickness, so that's actually the variation within that wall. That's how detailed those scans get. So you can really understand, you know, like we were looking at that 5x5, that's the angle of that rather than, so that's how far that opening is off of plumb. So it gives us a real close and clear understanding of what's going on with what's been built there. So that's looking at it in plan. Looking at this in 3D, you can see from a distance, it looks really realistic. It looks almost like a photograph. When you really zoom in, that's where it starts to get kind of, if it'll let me zoom in, it seems to want to just jump up there. Saw it for half a second. There you go. So you can kind of see how those points have a transparency to them. If my computer wasn't processing too much information right now, I could actually measure out the distance between those points. But that gives you an idea, like you can snap to any one of those points and it gives you an idea of how close you can get to verifying your as-built model or as-built conditions based on this scan. It's a pretty awesome level of precision there. Looking at it within the context of the Archicad model in 3D, what you can do is you could set your Archicad layers to show wireframe and then actually look at those walls, those MEP elements, that site and terrain as an overlay and understand how that relates to what's actually been built. Another kind of interesting feature of the point clouds is that they're full color regardless of what view they're in. So if we look at this in elevation, for example, you can see here I've got the Archicad wall and the point cloud wall right here. And the reason that it's fading out is because that's how close those things are to overlapping. Anytime that I'm actually seeing point cloud, that's basically the point standing proud of the Archicad model. So looking at these in various views, just like anytime we're doing anything in Archicad, you want to cycle through different views, not just get fixated on the 3D view, but take a look at elevations and model cuts and sections and floor plan. The point cloud can be viewed in all of those various views. Looking at what that point cloud actually means, if I select this point cloud conversion right here and go to the settings of it, this is actually an object within the library manager now. So because this is a teamwork file, it adds it to the embedded library. If it's a standalone PLN file, it'll actually add it as a full linked library all by itself. So it's containing within an LFC this object file along with macros for those point colors because it's converted from an E57 file. You can actually override the floor plan display range. So you could say, I want to show it at this cut height. And then you have the floor plan and section. So you could say, I want this to view on all stories, home stories. It's like any other object where you can control which stories this scan shows up on. The one thing I did notice is if you change the default unit measurement for this, notice that it's set to meter. The object is 37 feet. If I change it to feet, it scales it down. So don't mess around with the unit settings of the point cloud or it will throw the scale of your point cloud off. Some other just sort of quick tips, important things to know about the point cloud. Make sure that your object tool, and it doesn't matter what object you have when you open up the object tool settings, make sure this flip mirror option is not applied when you first load the point cloud because it will import the point cloud with that setting as the default. You obviously don't want to bring it in and see it's mirrored or you know, depending on what the point cloud is of, if it's of like a, say a boulder or a tree or some sort of site feature you're trying to get into context, it might not be obvious that it's mirrored right away. As far as like a full building scan, you're going to know that it's mirrored. But making sure that that's not checked in the object tool default settings before importing is really important. If you do need to move a point cloud after placing it, the one thing that I was finding useful was rather than just selecting it and hitting Command D to drag, if you right click and say move and move, select a point cloud by its origin, no matter where I click now, it's going to reference that origin as the new snap point. So now it's basically snapped the origin of that point cloud to where I click. So that can be a more effective way, especially if you know where the origin of that point cloud was scanned from. Lastly is just sort of general file maintenance. Make sure that you review the library manager after you import any file. It doesn't matter if it's a point cloud, a SketchUp file, an IFC file. Make sure that we keep our library manager clean. So when you look at the libraries in that file, this one being a teamwork file, that stuff is going to come in with its own subfolder, usually containing this GSM, and then there's probably buried in here somewhere, there's got to be the macro file for that. If we look back at this one, hopefully it's done now. Yeah, so there's that point cloud. And you can see, even in floor plan, I'm getting that full color resolution of that object. But if I look at the library manager on this file, being a standalone, it imports it as an LFC that contains the point cloud as an object, a GSM, and then this data file that includes all of the color codes and everything for that converted E57 file. So it's important to maintain both of those in whatever file is hosting the point cloud. And then when we're done with these point clouds, if you are checking them in your main working file, make sure that we're not storing them in there. You know, we talked at a lunch and learn recently about just general file maintenance management, sort of self audits. Keeping the file lean is important for maintaining sort of the workability of our Archicad files. These objects are big. If we look at the converted object here, we've got like 1.6 gigs of data just with this macro file alone. So this file is 1.6 gigabytes bigger because we're storing that in there. Let's not bloat these files up any more than they need to be. We have a hard time with some of the files, some of the projects staying below the 3 to 5 gig limit, and this would just kill one of those files. So do this work in a separate standalone file, a copy of the main working file, or just purge it out when you're done working and validating. Any questions on point clouds?
Yes. How do you import the point cloud at the right spot in your Archicad model?
That takes a little bit of finesse because there is no, the point cloud doesn't have like the 000 project origin. It has the point cloud origin. So you kind of have to get a corner of the building and verify where that snaps from here to, like, you have to pick 2 or 3 different points and verify that it's aligned. You know, it's not quite as seamless and easy to manipulate and merge into the file as, say, an IFC file, where the project origin should be the same from Archicad to Revit to Soluble to whatever. I don't know, is Daniel, are you on the call here? Maybe you can make a few comments in terms of how you did that for the Margus Camp workflow.
He's not on the call, Pat.
He's not on the call. Okay. Well, he's the one that really sort of championed this workflow for Margus Camp. I know that we went through the process together, and it wasn't necessarily that big of a headache, especially when they broke it down into these separate files rather than having one big site file. We're able to basically pick a point on this building and say, okay, this lines up with that corner. Let's verify where this one lines up, and sort of shuffle it and nudge it around until it fit within the context of the Archicad model. You know, there's certainly, obviously, anything built is going to have a tolerance or a margin of error that Archicad just doesn't have. You know, things get shifted 30 seconds of an inch, 1/8 of an inch here and there, especially in like rough framing and concrete. So kind of finding that middle ground, you kind of have to shuffle and look at a couple of different points. And again, looking at it in section, plan, 3D, and elevation can help you get there. Anything else? All right. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, Chris Ryan used that for the boulder point cloud scanning. Is this, and you were talking about you can scan yourself, that just with an iPhone app or a special camera?
I don't know in terms of what was done on that. Have
Okay.
to check in with him on that.
I thought he
Yeah.
had said an iPhone app. I know you've been talking about scanning some of the featured trees on site too. I think it's just good to keep in mind that, this whole hiring a consultant to do the whole official thing for your whole existing building and site is good too. I think there's also a second application where I just need this in the model for reference or something, and
Yeah.
we can find out which apps are the best for that. But
Yeah.
just a couple different levels of scanning.
Yeah, we've talked about, the BIM teams actually talked about possibly using like some drone cameras as an option to scan. I don't know that any progress has been made in terms of us doing our own scans. I don't, maybe Chris Ryan had something with the phone that he had done on that particular project, but everything that I've seen and helped out with has been a consultant generated scan.
So we could scan a boulder with an iPhone and then 3D print it to insert it in a model. Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll say that's what Chris Ryan did say. He did do that with an app on his phone for that particular purpose. And then I've heard from another firm that does, as a matter of course, they have their own drone and operator within the firm, and they go for projects that are kind of rural, similar to our projects. They'll send the drone up, do a scan of the immediate area to get all of the trees and vegetation and bring that into their model. So they have a mixture similar to our approach with our site models in twinmotion. They have the far away reference, stuff that's pulled from GIS and other data, and then the close up things that are really important for views in our models. They get pretty accurate information by pulling that, everything in whatever 100 yards around it or 50 yards around the building to bring that into the model. It's pretty powerful potentially.
Yeah, the one thing I was noticing from these particular scans were that trees, depending on exactly the angle, had either too much or too little transparency to them. But that could also be more about the quality of the scan than necessarily what was being scanned. So I think as like a middle ground, landscape stuff might be an interesting asset to like the twinmotion files. But here, like this, these trees, for example, if I pull those up in 3D, this was not scanned on a snowy day, but this is what they come in like. From certain distances, maybe that's acceptable, but
yeah, and I think that that basically gives the exact size and shape that then you can maybe replace that with something in a virtual version of that you can plug in that's acceptable with our visualization.
Yeah. So we can jump to you, and maybe you can give us a quick demonstration of what these point clouds can look like in twinmotion, and then talk about the ray tracing.
Yeah, sure. So let me share my screen. Yeah, so I have a bunch of images here. I just throw in basically just a raw point cloud file into twinmotion, and it's working okay, I guess. But you still see there's a lot of like some points are not coming together, and you see the gaps in between them. Let me flip to the other side. And the thing is, you cannot use path trace on these point clouds object because they will disappear. I mean, essentially these are just points. They don't cast any shadows in a path trace environment, so they'll just be like nothing. But I think these are good tools if you're looking to say scan like an object on site, and special objects such as a rock or a tree. I imagine trees will be harder because trees will kind of shake in the wind, and I imagine the scan will be a lot fuzzier. But And also, if you want to scan some background landscape, I think that will be helpful too. And surprisingly, the file size is a lot smaller than I imagined after I put all these, I dumped all these like 2 gigabytes files in there. The twinmotion file is just like 108 megabytes, which is pretty surprising. Let me flip through that. The other thing you want to keep an eye on is when you're using this for rendering purpose. I suggest you make the scan on an overcast day without sharp shadows. Otherwise, you'll have to match your twinmotion sun with the sharp shadow you have on your point cloud objects. But yeah, for sure, if you just doing this for rendering purpose, imported it directly into twinmotion, and don't do it in Archicad and then in twinmotion. So if you want to do a point cloud import, there's a window here where you can just directly pull in all the files. Okay, so let me show you how to do the point clouds. I mean, the path tracing renderings. So we have a PC at the office available for everyone to remote in and jump in to use the path trace function on PC. What you need to do is to go to the remote desktop, and then you can access the PC in the office. Once you're on the PC and open up your twinmotion file, you can go to a view, and then you can just hit the toggle button here, and then you should be good to go. You're in the path tracing mode. After that, what you need to do is usually you'll need to throw in a sky dome. It doesn't necessarily have to do a sky dome under path trace, but to achieve like a better result, I recommend you can turn on the sky dome for more realistic lighting. And then you can drag and drop the sky dome you want onto the sky dome. I think to go there, drop down. It takes some tests to find the best sky dome you want to match the mood you want to have on your rendering, and usually the sky dome tends to go darker. So you want to increase the intensity, play around with the intensity, and you can use rotate to change the direction of the sky dome to orientate your sun. And usually you can also try to bump up the exposure a little bit. Yeah, but depends on different sky dome. You want to adjust these lighting settings differently. And once you're happy with the result, you can just go about your regular export window and just click export. So I'll show a few examples what you can get from these path trace tests, path trace renderings. So this is an example of a regular output of a rendering, and this is path tracing. You can tell that the reflections and the lightings are more realistic in the path tracing rendering. And also, if you choose to use overcast sky dome, it won't cause this kind of sharp shadows on the ground. So it's more close to a realistic condition, and with some minimum adjustment in Photoshop and maybe some side element Photoshop into the images, you can really achieve like really realistic result. And so even though we cannot use the point cloud in our path tracing, you can take, say, a photo and then cut it out and paste it on there, or there are also ways to convert point cloud into mesh, and then you can use that mesh to just render that out straight from your twinmotion as well. I'm still looking into those kind of tools to convert point cloud to mesh, but some of the tools out there is, one of them are Mesh Labs, and I think the other one is called Neo Geo Matching or something. But yeah, there are tools out there that I'll look into those.
Hey, Yi, I had looked at a workflow that I still need to test out as well, but it's an application called Cloud Compare to Rhino for converting point clouds to solid or mesh models, or well, it would be a NURBS model. So yeah, there are interesting workflows.
And also for these kind of point cloud scan, these some other software they can help to clean up this kind of situation in these point cloud scans as well. I mean, that also depends on the scan quality, the initial scan qualities, but you can process that too.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of the limitations or time constraints, I guess, for that the trace, the
path trace?
Yeah, path tracing.
There really isn't a lot of time constraint, because you can see here it's previewing very quickly. And I'll say for this kind of image, it's probably just double the time of your regular image. If regular time takes a minute, just take 2 or 2.5 minutes. Sometimes takes a bit longer if you have more lightings, such as this kind of interior views. Yeah, it's just more, I guess, more calculation to make once you have more lights and refractions, all that.
Yeah, can you just talk a little bit about how you see people using, the main in-house twinmotion render that renders live versus what situations are you going to use a path trace render? Because like you said, it does take more time to compute, but I think the time that it takes to get the lighting just right and everything makes it, you're not going to do that for every single shot that you send, right? So
right.
How do you?
There isn't too much time you need to commit to this kind of path tracing, because you're gonna set up the lightings right for the general lightings, like the interior lights and exterior lights and all that. You're gonna set that up anyway. You just need to toggle the sky dome lightings and tweak the exposure intensity a little bit, and then I think you should be good to go. Yeah, I think it's definitely worth it to spend that maybe extra an hour to do this kind of a higher quality rendering. And if you want to bring it to an even higher standard, you can spend another 1 or 2 hours to do a little bit of Photoshop.
Yeah, I think this is kind of where we start to get into the same sort of rendering technology as the consultants that we usually hire for renderings, like 3DQ. So it's oftentimes a judgment question for teams whether they're going to hire someone else or if they have the timeline and staff that they just want to produce the first version in-house, and we can use things like this path tracing to up our rendering game. So it's not just the limitations of twinmotion, live model rendering, but we can get a little bit closer. But it is a little bit more of a time commitment. And usually as our projects go, designing up until the last minute, it's a judgment call to make. Whether you need to set this in the lifelike quality, if your model's lifelike enough that when you put real life shadows on it, you have real good materials and stuff that they're going to look good, or whether you want to hold back a little bit and purposefully restrain your model in case you're still working on the design and you don't want to show the client something that looks like a finished picture.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
And yeah, I just wanted to highlight again that this is the path tracing is a Windows only feature because it's dependent on that's a technology specific to NVIDIA, which Apple has not had NVIDIA graphics chips for a long time. So currently just Windows only. So yeah, ping me if you want some help getting connected to that VRPC.
Yeah, and I want to say if we just want to use this PC just for rendering out some panorama or video, this kind of a really time-consuming task, yeah, you can certainly do that too. So you don't bug down your Mac at home.
Yeah, that's a good point, Yi, because yeah, the twinmotion, whether it's on Windows or Mac, it's using the same files, so you don't have to do any conversion, and you can export those panoramas or videos much quicker than the Macs can. So
yeah, and you can keep your twinmotion just on server and open from there.
Yep.
Hey, this is I have a question really quick on this. Are you noticing, aside from like the path tracing, quality difference from Mac to PC on the rendering quality, or is it the same if you aren't using the path tracing?
Mac doesn't have the path tracing function, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, I'm saying with not without using that, if you were to hit render minus path trace, is it going to be any different than what we're producing on our Macs?
Yeah, you can see the reflection is a lot more accurate. In general, just the lighting is more accurate.
I think between a path trace render and normal render, yeah, there's a difference, but a normal render on Mac versus PC is the exact same thing. There's no quality difference, apples to apples.
Yeah.
The VRPC is just a little bit faster. It's like a supercomputer. It's got like the highest end GPU. So if you need to do 30 images overnight, you can log into that remotely and not have your Mac sound like it's going to take flight while it's rendering all those views.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, let's keep the train rolling, and we can circle back to questions at the end if we have some time. Matt, you want to talk about Quixel and asset management?
Yeah, sure. So I'll keep it quick, but just want to go over some of the common questions that people always run into. So on projects, there's always almost going to be a circumstance where you want to do a custom texture, or a custom object. Can people see my screen, by the way? Yeah. Okay. So a couple of steps I would go through. Let's say you need a custom texture object. The first one, obviously, is just to work with your team. And, whether you're new at the firm or if you've been here for a while, oftentimes, when we're selecting a surface, we'll look at a previous project of ours for inspiration. So if you're looking for, I just want to start with the Durban wood siding texture, oftentimes you can go into the server, and whether that's looking at the twinmotion maps folders or assets folders, just find that exact texture, or go into the Archicad model and you can download it from the library there. That's often a good place to start before we eventually go into different iterations of refining the color of that, how it's looking, all the different treatments that we do. The next step is kind of, okay, this is one we've never done before. We really need this new kind of stone. Where are we looking for that? First thing you can look through is just on a custom textures website. The one that I usually use and is called textures.com. There's plenty of out there, but I like this one because one, you can make a free account just with your Walker Warner email. And that will let you download photorealistic scan textures at a reasonable size for free. And the best way to look for those, let's say I'm looking for wood siding. I'll just look for wood, and if you hit on this seamless texture filter, that'll make sure everything is going to tile nicely when we put it in our model, and it's not going to look like the same one copy pasted. And just looking here, you can really start to refine all these photorealistic scans of models. And let's say we like this one, we want to tweak it a little bit. You can go in here and you can download for free the medium version of this textures they call albedo. There's so many different names. So it's basically the one that looks like an image. You can also download your reflection map and bump map all through here. So this is oftentimes a good place to look when you're looking for a new material and we haven't done it before. start with looking at something at textures.com. The next step is when we get a little bit more custom. We run this a lot of times with stone paving, tiles on the inside, even wood board layouts. Let's say we want a custom layout of like a different size runs of tile going at different thicknesses with a specific joint depth. Instead of scouring the internet to find that exact tile or making one from scratch in Photoshop, we use this thing called Architectures, which again, Walker Warner has membership to. If you go into your 1Password, you can ask David Barr to add you to this pro license for Architectures, but this allows you to pick any custom setting of tile bond and layout that we're going to do. You can set the size of it. Again, you can see that it's seamless. It's going to repeat naturally, and you can either upload your own image of a texture or use one of their basic ones to really start to refine. They've really thought this through. You can refine almost all the details that we really look for, how much a tone is going to vary between different settings, what the color of the mortar is before. If we just want like a nice dark one, you can do that. And let's say I want a skinnier reveal there. So in 30 seconds, you can make a custom texture image that's going to give you a whatever size image that you need to load into Archicad, twinmotion, you name it. So this is just another quick little tip to make your job easier so you can focus on doing architecture and not making custom texture graphics. When it comes into 3D objects, there's a whole nother course of selections you can look through if you need a custom piece of furniture or something. Again, always look through the default Archicad library or Walker Warner favorites or twinmotion library, see something that there's close enough. But if it's really a feature object that you need, the two options I usually go for are one, like good old SketchUp warehouse. You can do that for trees or furniture. The one update that Pat wanted me to talk about is the newest version of SketchUp makes it kind of difficult to get into Archicad. It only gives you these new versions of SketchUp, which Archicad can't read. So really, nowadays we're trying to only use the SketchUp 3D warehouse for twinmotion stuff. If you really need it in Archicad, we can help you put a SketchUp file through Rhino and spit out something that'll go into Archicad, but try and avoid it if possible, and just make your own custom model. If you need furniture, just spend 10 minutes roughing in one out of slabs or maybe morphs to get it close enough. The other option, of course, is there's a ton of actual 3D model stores where, this is one where Turbo Squid, where they have all these amazing models of photorealistic trees, kind of like the libraries that our 3D rendering consultants have. And there are a ton of situations, for on projects, we really need this specific tree. That's the feature tree that's going to take people out of immersion if we're going through this in the model. And we can work together to buy a custom model of this, whether it's for a tree or for furniture or you name it. It's a quick one of just some of the web resources we like to use. One other thing I'll talk about is this built-in Quixel feature in Twinmotion. And it used to be just a standard different website that now Twinmotion has bought and actually folded into Twinmotion. And through this, there's, again, a lot more resources for a lot of random stuff. A lot of it is really good and applies to us, like 3D surfaces for any building materials. These are particularly helpful for kind of existing rustic buildings, or things on site, but it's anything that you can search for. You can search for in the top Twinmotion search bar here to find what you're looking for. The only caveat for any of these is when you go to do it, you can't just drag it on. You can see there's a little download icon here in the top right. So to access any of these kind of premium textures, we already have a membership. All you have to do is go here to File, sign into Epic Games, and that'll prompt you to open a web browser. And we've got a typical Walker Warner registration account that, again, David Bard can help you get set up with. And now if you give it a few seconds, it'll process the sign in. We'll say it's completed. And now you can go ahead and hit download on that, and it'll give you a custom texture. And if I just go ahead and make a block right now, we can go back to Quixel, find our custom surface that we want to add. Let's do this one. And slap it on there. It'll take a second to compute. So this is another good resource for custom textures, things that you're not really going to find in default libraries. And as well as I think a common one that we're going to use these for is site stone walls. So there's a lot of good ones here. If we go here. So a lot of times, instead of trying to find like the perfect rocky texture that's going to if you squint your eyes enough, it looks like a rock wall. Here you can actually download 3D rock walls that look like an actual rock wall, a very tiny one, but you actually get the bumps in it. So just another tool in our toolkit for how we show our models. So we got 1 minute left, so I kind of sped through that. But if you guys have any questions,
Yes.
happy to talk about it.
Actually, does it add a lot of, does it take a lot of memory? Does it slow down the model if you add 100 of these walls?
100 is probably the most I would do. The real kicker is that it'll take you a lot of time. You can imagine to custom size this and stretch it and turn the corners you need. So it's kind of save this for the front and center parts of your model that, you know, it's crucial for me to get this wall right here and see if you can make a generic one work for the back of house.
Yeah, like more generic site context, if it's off in the distance, probably best to even do that in Archicad.
Yeah.
Based on a survey, you know, like if we have a survey of those site walls, you can mock that up in Archicad, apply a texture that has the roughness sort of as a JPEG piece. It's off in a distance, so you don't need to see that it's like exactly that detailed.
Yeah.
And it looks like, I guess, if you wanted to have less detailed part and off the distance, but then have this more detailed part somewhat match, it looks like you can affect the color and some of the parameters.
Yep. So you could totally just steal this texture and apply it to like a normal rectangle, and again, tweak the color as much as you need. So like we always say, a lot of this modeling stuff is just being scrappy and making it work in our twinmotion, just enough so that our model still runs fine, but it looks good when you look at the important stuff.
Oh, I also had a follow-up question kind of to Sandrine, and hi to whoever haven't met in here before. I'm Isabella, I'm an intern for the summer. And so I know that these will be like more, taking up a little bit more memory than the default textures. I was also just wondering for the architectures, or if you get it from a texture website, how do those also do with the memory?
Yeah, no, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Usually with the 2D textures, there's not too much to worry about. In this one, we're actually even limited just on a free count to the size you get, which is about 1,000 pixels. So that's usually good enough for most of my purposes. If you're doing a path traced render and you need this special texture looking really good, that's when you ask the BIM team if we can buy you one of these higher versions of it, which we certainly do. And if it's really needed, but most of the time I find these textures, sizes, anything that you can download here under 10,000 pixels is going to be fine it's going to look fine, and it's not going to blow up your model.
If they're coming into Archicad before Twinmotion, which is oftentimes a workflow that we use for these, because we do want to see the Archicad model at least have some similarity to the Twinmotion renderings. So if you're importing them into Archicad, there are rules of thumb for that. Like JPEGs and PNGs shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 megs. Regardless of their resolution, they should be under 3 megs max if they're coming into Archicad. I think Twinmotion's a little bit more forgiving, but it really depends on how much of the model is covered in that surface.
Yeah, a lot of the times it's, you'll know if your texture is too big if right after you apply it, you run into a bunch of problems or it runs super slow. So again, just being scrappy and being able to react to that is kind of how we do it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else, guys?
Yeah, do we have a place, specific folder in the server where those purchased textures or trees are stored for?
Yep. They're on the Walker Warner BIM library server. I go here, AC library. We go to Twinmotion library and purchase objects. Here's where we get a bunch of trees that Jay has sent us, all the trees that we've purchased, we all place here. So we can flesh this out. Again, especially with trees, that's one you really got to watch out for the file size on. And again, you'll know if it's too big because it'll blow up your file after and you'll want to undo it. But most of these things you can download different sizes of. So it's a work in process. Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody. If there's any follow-up questions, you can post on the BIM channel, and any one of the BIM team members or even Alexa that presented today can probably squeeze some time out and go over this in more detail, sort of on a one-on-one or small group as well. So yeah, that's the end of our hour. Thank you everyone who helped present today and everyone who attended.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Good stuff. Thanks all.
Thank you.